So if this sort of aspiring to achieve happiness and wishing to overcome suffering is our natural state of being, that is our natural kind of quest, then the question arises, how do we go about fulfilling that valid natural aspiration? So here we find in the teachings of the Four Noble Truths an understanding of two sets of cause and results, cause and effects. On the one hand, you have suffering, which is what we all try to avoid. And suffering comes into being from nowhere, but as a result of causes its own causes and conditions. And similarly, you have happiness on the other side. And cessation can be seen as the highest form of happiness. Now here, when we talk about happiness, we should not confine our understanding purely only to the level of feeling states. Certainly, cessation is not a state of feeling, but one could say that the cessation is the highest culmination or highest form of happiness, because it is a true state of freedom from suffering. So, and that true freedom from suffering or happiness, true happiness, again does not come into being from nowhere or without any cause. Of course, here, from the Buddha's understanding, cessation, because it is not in conditioned existence, cannot be said that it was produced by something. But of course, actualization or attainment of that cessation depends on the path. It depends on an individual's effort. It does not come. You cannot attain cessation without making an effort. So one could say that the path that leads to the cessation is the cause that leads to the cessation. So within the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, what we find are two sets of cause and effects, which are all aimed at enabling the individual to fulfill this fundamental aspiration to be happy and to overcome suffering.
나 담바시 구름디 아니 균제 중릉기 구름디 매버체 이 냠랭기 아니 나 냠뇨께당기 난갈 때는 구름디 송인체 동네 군중 고과 람스 담바시.
And then the question could be asked, if of course if that's the reason why Four Noble Truths are taught, then one could ask about why there is this specific sequence, why the Four Noble Truths are taught in a particular order, why suffering first and its origin afterwards. So here we should understand that these order has nothing to do with where things come into being in reality, but rather it has more to do with how an individual can go about in practicing the Buddhist path and attaining realizations based on that practice, and that has to do with the order of the Four Noble Truths.
잠바고도 안다 유라면 나로리야 내는 시자 내지균이 방자라 대내 도저 맨날 담바 차와 따르스 아니 동의주도 된거봐도 디신람 아니 시자 방자 리보셔시 잡으셔시 담바셔시 송니 딱 빼나 아주 내지 나에 동의질 뺏고네 아니 도마 내 너기여도 그냥 시고레스 봐 내 너기여도 시베이나 다 신의 내들 민들로 게임도잖아요 any natty do Canadian Chungdua, the Julia, their gender.
Maitreya states in his Uttara Tantra, a Sublime Continuum, which is a text, he states that states that one must recognize that one is suffering. So the illness has to be first recognized, and then the causes of illness to be avoided, and the state of sort of cure must be sought, and then the medicine that would lead to that cure is something that one must take or adopt. Similarly, suffering is something that one must recognize, and the origin of the suffering is something that one must abandon. And the cessation of suffering and its origin is something that one must aspire to actualize. And then the paths that would lead to to that cessation must be realized. So what this points to is that here the analogy that is used to explain the way in which realizations based on the Four Noble Truths could be attained. The analogy used here is the example of a sick person. In order for that sick person to get well, the first step is that the sick person must know that he or she is sick, or he or she is ill. But without that, the desire to become well or cured from that sickness would not arise. And once you have that recognition, awareness that you are sick, then of course you will try to find out what led to it, what were the conditions that led to it, and what makes you even more sick. Once you have recognized that, then you will also gain a sort of an understanding whether it could be cured or not, and then you will have sort of a wish to be free from that illness. Once you have that wish, then you will apply all the medical. It's not just a mere wish, but also once you have recognized what are the conditions that led to your illness, you will also have a stronger desire to be free from that, because in a sense, you will also have a conviction that you can overcome that illness. Once you have that conviction, then you will also apply all the medications and get treatment and so on. Similarly, unless you know that you are suffering, your desire to be free from suffering would not arise in the first place. So the first step for a practicing Buddhist is to recognize your state of being as a dukkha, as in the nature of suffering. Once you have attained that recognition, then you will, of course, look into the causes and conditions that give rise to that state of suffering.
다전에 자든데 인도 동네에 타르에 따단도 대화지 그게 가서라 따단도 대화 대당 대두지 따 탑람지 예바 인자네 아니 수족이 민두비 동네 삼야디 따 중생된 말이에요.
It's very important to understand the context of the Buddhist emphasis on developing this profound recognition of being in the state of suffering or dukkha. Otherwise, there is a danger of misunderstanding the Buddhist spiritual kind of approach, outlook, and thinking that Buddhism demands a lot of morbid thinking. Being sort of pessimistic and thinking only about suffering. The reason why Buddha emphasized so much on developing a profound insight into the nature of suffering is because there is an alternative, there is a way out, there is a possibility of a freedom from that suffering. That's why the recognition or realization of the nature of suffering becomes very important, because the stronger or more deep your insight into the state of suffering is, the stronger the force of your aspiration to gain freedom from that would become. So it is important to understand that this emphasis on the nature of suffering and the Buddhist spiritual path is within the context of a wider perspective, where there is an appreciation that there is a way out, that there is a possibility of a freedom from that suffering. Otherwise, if there is no possibility of a freedom from suffering, if there is no concept of a liberation from suffering, then it is totally pointless to spend so much time reflecting on suffering. It will be just useless.
다 군의 유무적인 군대다 남자적인 군대 이부디 바 군중다 아니 람댕기 딘 대부 용단디마 컨디션 만드셔 14로 전에 아니 야라주니디 도매 머리고 되는 두지는 남신에는 민수 가사리 계제자고 저하신 도스마다 아니 야라주니 송도 야라주니 룩중도 타네 아니 가서 그 코 죽도체 코 룽중도 하네 머리 번에 맞아 것이부터 마송야다 야나 야 다갈래 양고 룽중도 니수니 것이 된지 아니 계획 된지 중 계획 된지 아니 시베 된지 중 도시야 저는 그런 룽중도 니샤 룽중도 니团的 마시니 가다 군인 용무초 코 죽수치.
So one could say that these two sets of cause and effects that I was talking about earlier refers to the process of an unenlightened existence on the one hand, which relates to the causal nexus between suffering and its origin, and then a process of an enlightened existence, which pertains to the causal nexus of a path and the true cessation. Now, when the Buddha elaborates the understanding of these two processes, then he taught what is called the teaching, the doctrine of the 12 links of dependent origination. These being the 12 members of the link being ignorance leading to volition, and then that leading to consciousness and so on. So that is in some sense an elaboration on the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, when the causal process of an unenlightened existence that is sort of within the framework of suffering and its origin is elaborated, then you have the sequential order of the 12 links of dependent origination, how an individual sentient being, as a result of certain causes and conditions, enters into this process of samsaric existence or unenlightened existence. Whereas that very individual, as a result of certain practices, can engage in a reversal process of that order, which pertains to the processes that leads to enlightenment. And here, then the 12 cycles, instead of rotating in a sort of a sequential way, their sequences are reversed, and that leads to the true cessation. For example, like if you seize the continuum of ignorance, then of course the continuum of the volitional actions will be seized. If that is seized, then the consciousness that serves as the kind of duji. And so that ceases. When the consciousness ceases, the name and form ceases. So you can see that the teachings on the 12 links of dependent origination are in some sense elaboration of the two sets of causes and conditions.
Yeah, that's enough.
So we will have some questions here at this point.
written questions.
So perhaps in the next sessions, if the questions could be in a written form, it would be more convenient. The question was that His Holiness spoke about individuals gaining the practice, sort of individual practitioners gaining insight into the Four Noble Truths, and then spoke about Buddha having perfected these insights. So the question was, what is the difference between individuals gaining insights and Buddha's perfection of these insights? Is that the question?
Pena Midawa Dogwa Lord Chashana Toma Bena Dengzin She Dengzin de any that Tenju the Shitigi Ribepa Jenny, you Papa Jane is any touching zingi Logdodi and Tazumorchi.
To give an example of, say, gaining insight into the subtle impermanence that the momentary nature of all things and events.